Hello everyone! Welcome to Electrifying Economics. I'm Manisha, and in today's video we're going to be talking about supply. So without any further ado, let's get into the video. So today's topic, as you guys know, is supply. So let's get into the content. So what is supply? Supply is the number of goods and services that a producer is willing and able to produce in a given price and in a given time period. So we need to make sure that the supplier or the producer is able and willing to produce the good or service. Willing is when the supplier or producer wants to produce the good or service, but able is when the supplier or the producer is able to take the cost to produce the good or service. Because to produce any type of good or service, you have to put in your money. You need to invest on the factors of production, because factors of production are raw materials which will help the producer to supply the good or service. Now, if you don't know what factors of production is, don't worry, please go check out my video on factors of production. I will link it in the description box below. So we need to make sure that the supplier or the producer is willing and able to produce the good or service. The law of supply. The law of supply states that as the price for good or service increases, the quantity supplied of the good or service increases at the same time. So by this, we see that the price and the quantity supplied are proportional to each other. Movement along the supply curve. Like in demand, we have movement along the demand curve. The same way in supply, we have movement along the supply curve. So an extension is when the price of the good or service increases. In turn, it leads to the quantity supplied increasing. So we can remember this by thinking of the expansion or extension in supply, which is the same thing. So it's like as the price increases, the quantity supplied increases. So there is an increase, hence an expansion. So that way we could remember that an expansion or extension in supply is when there's an increase in price, there's an increase in quantity supplied. This is opposite to the demand, but it is confusing, but you just need to remember it. Now, if you guys don't know what exactly is going on with the demand curve, don't worry, go check out my previous video on demand. But let's get back to supply. So extension or expansion is when there's an increase in price of a good or service, hence leading to an increase in quantity supply. So here, this arrow represents extension, and a contraction, on the other hand, is when the price of a good or service decreases, the quantity supplied also decreases. So here, this arrow represents a contraction in supply. This arrow, the upward arrow, shows extension, and the downward arrow shows contraction. So the shifts in the supply curve. A shift in the supply occurs due to the conditions of supply. Now, like in demand, we had the determinants of demand or the non-price determinants. The same way in supply, we have something called as conditions of supply. Conditions of supply are basically the non-price factors of supply which affect the supply. So, like in movement along the demand curve, it affected the quantity supplied. But a shift in the supply curve affects the supply. The whole supply curve moves outwards or inwards. So these are basically the non-price factors which shift the supply curve outwards or inwards. So a rightward shift indicates an increase in supply, and a leftward shift or an inward shift indicates a decrease in supply. So let's look into what these conditions of supply are. One of the non-price factors of supply are changes in the cost of factors of production. Cost of production are the amount it takes for the producer or the supplier to fund their production process or to buy the factors of production that they need, the raw materials that they need to produce the good or service. Now, I said at the starting that producers or suppliers need to put in money to buy their factors of production because otherwise they don't get the factors of production. So without factors of production, you can't produce the good or service that you need. You need the raw materials or the resources to produce them. So if the cost of producing a good or service increases, then the firm will not be able to supply as much of the good or service that the producer was able to supply before there was an increase in the cost of production. So, if the cost of producing a good or service increases, then the quantity supplied will decrease because the suppliers won't have enough money left to produce the same amount they were producing before. Because suppose the factors of production or any factor that leads to an increase in cost of production will affect the supply. So in this case, let's just say that there is an increase in the price of factors of production. So let's just take a wood market. So let's say the suppliers or the producers buy 10 logs of wood to, make chairs. So if those 10 logs of wood at the start in 2020, suppose it costs $100, but as 2021 came, then the price increased of the wood. So now it costs $150. So the producers will have an increase in their costs. So to producers, the wood is their demand. So if you think about it, the producers are also a demander or the consumer of the wood because they take the wood, their raw material, and that is the demand for wood. But their cost of production increased. So $100 for 10 logs of wood, but now it takes $150, let's just say. So let's say that now the producers will only buy $100 worth of wood. So let's just say it takes like 7 logs of wood as $100. I do not do mathematical calculations right now. So if that's not actually what's happening, then forget it. But it's just an example. So their supply would shift inwards. Hence, the change in the cost of production will decrease the quantity supplied. Hence, this will shift the whole supply curve to the left, the next non-price factor. So, an improvement in technology affects supply. How? Let's look into it. So, if there's an improvement in technology, then this would mean that they have a better quality of factors of production. In this case, this is an improvement in the capital. A side note, capital is a factor of production, a type of factor of production. So capital is basically stuff like technology. I have explained this in more detail in my factors of production video. So it's really important that you check that out. And the link will be in the description. So an improvement in technology means that there's an improvement in the quality of factors of production. Hence, this will lead to more quantity supplied as capital or machines or technology are very much more efficient compared to the workers. That's true. And why is that the case? All of that will be in upcoming videos. So please stay tuned and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. So hence this would mean that more goods and services can be produced in the same time period. And this is because machines are more faster and more efficient than humans. Yes, machines also save costs in the long run, but in the short run, they don't, because in the short run, they are really expensive because technology usually is really expensive. So in the short run, the firm will face a problem, a drawback. They won't be able to cope up with their cost of production, but in the long run, like in a year or 2 years' time, they'll be able to produce more amount of the good or service. So their supply shifts outwards to the right. Changes in the subsidies or indirect taxes is a form of non-price factor that affects the supply. So subsidies are basically the money given by the government to the firms so that they can increase their supply and lower the prices of the goods and services. So subsidies reduce the cost of production as now the firms have more money in their hand, so hence they can buy more factors of production, hence they will be able to supply their good or service in a lower cost. And a side note is that this type of concept will be explained in more detail in upcoming videos. So again, stay tuned and subscribe to my channel. So subsidies reduce the cost of production, hence there are more of the good or service produced, hence shifting the entire supply curve to the right outwards. But if the firm is not given subsidies, then the supply curve stays the same or even goes inwards. So if a subsidy is given to the firm at the start, maybe in 2020, but now the government decides to not give subsidies to the firm, then the supply curve shifts back inwards. So depending upon the situation, subsidies increase or decrease the supply by shifting the supply curve outwards or inwards. Now, indirect tax is a tax on spending or expenditure imposed by governments on firms. So indirect taxes are basically a form of tax enforced by governments on the firms, and governments do this on the type of good or service which is very unhealthy or harmful for the consumers, but they still consume or demand the goods. So one example is cigarettes. Governments impose high amounts of indirect taxes on cigarettes, alcohol, and stuff like that. There are also some other examples, but talking about which type of good or service the government imposes the indirect tax on is explained in detail in some other topic. So you know what to do. Subscribe right now. So if the government imposes high indirect taxes on a firm, then this would hence lead to an increase in the cost of production. Again, indirect tax is one which increases the cost of production, and subsidies decreases the cost of production. So indirect tax increases the cost of production, and now you know the drill. If the cost of production increases, the supply curve will shift inwards to the left. So this would lead to lower supply, hence shifting the supply curve to the left. Another non-price factor which affects supply is the weather conditions. So the production of many goods is dependent or is affected by the weather, and these are mostly agricultural products like wheat, corn, maize. All of these are affected by the weather conditions. So if the weather is good and suitable for the type of fruit or crop to grow, then there would be a higher supply of the good or service. So that's why we say that, oh, the summer is a season of mangoes, but in winter you don't get that ripe or very sweet mangoes. You kind of get it sour, or sometimes you don't even have the production of mangoes. So that's one of the examples. Another example is, consider a market of corn, and if there are floods, then it would be harder for the farmers to grow their crops, and hence this would mean the corn also doesn't grow, hence there would be a leftward shift and inward shift in the supply. This would hence lower the supply. Another non-price factor of supply is changes in the price of other products. So what is this? How is it affected? Let's look into it. So the price level of goods and services affect the supply of a good or service, as the main motto of the firm is to make profits, and the products which have higher price will have a higher supply. So this is something which is very fundamental. Firms and businesses, most firms and businesses always have the main motto of making profits. So if one type of good or service is given a higher price, if the consumers pay higher price for one type of good or service, then the suppliers will have an incentive to produce that good or service. Hence, there would be an increase in supply, a rightward shift in the supply of that product. On the other hand, if consumers don't pay a high price for another product, then the supply of that product will shift inward to the left. So now let's consider a market of blue pens and black pens. If the price of black pens increases, then the producers will be willing to shift or allocate their resources to producing black pens instead of blue pens. This is because black pens would give them a higher revenue, higher profit, and suppliers or producers always look at what good or service or which method maximizes their profit, which is basically gives a maximum amount of profit to them. You will understand this better by looking at how the supply curve works. It is also worth noting and remembering that black pens and blue pens relatively use the same type of factors of production. Hence, these two products can be labeled in the same PPC or the production possibility curve. Hence, the producers in the short run would be able to shift their supply from producing blue pens to black pens or black pens to blue pens, depending upon which way the price is working. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, like the allocation of resources or the PPC, go check my other video on production possibility curves. I need to mention here that a lot of concepts in economics are tied together because as you progress through the course, you start to understand the previous concepts better because they're really tied and you learn more steps as you progress through the course. Hence, it is necessary that you know the previous topics reasonably well or really well, and that's why I keep on repeating in all of my videos, I think, that please go check out my previous video or other video because I have talked about the concept in other videos. So please go check it out and do stay tuned. Another non-price factor that affects supply is the number of suppliers in the market. So what is this? It is quite confusing, but you will get a hang of it really soon. So if the number of suppliers or the producers in the market increase, then this will lead to an increase in the amount of the particular type of good or service being produced in the market. So by this, what I'm basically trying to say is that if the amount or the number of suppliers in a market, let's just say the market of chocolates, the market of chocolates. So if the number of producers who are supplying or producing the chocolates increases, then this would mean the market supply will increase and shift to the right, hence leading to the supply curve shifting outwards, and this also works vice versa. So those were the non-price factors or the conditions of supply. And that wraps it up for today. If I was able to help you with understanding the concept of supply, then can you please hit the like button, share this video with your friends and family, and also don't forget to follow me on Instagram to get more instant updates. And please subscribe to my channel and also hit the bell icon right next to it so you will be notified whenever a new video is posted. That's it. Thank you so much for supporting. And also, don't forget to leave your valuable comments down below on how I could possibly improve my videos or any other additional tips. And if you have any questions, please comment down below and I will try my best to help you. I am no expert, but I have a lot of passion for economics. So that's it for today's video. Thank you so much. See you soon in my next video. Until then, happy economics!